and welcome back to another episode of the Widow podcast. Today, I am super excited to have a very wonderful guest, a very inspiring guest with me, Dana Frost. Dana is a cancer survivor herself, a widow, and founder of the Forced Joy Project, which is amazing, absolutely amazing. Dana's mission is to inspire and empower others to find joy in the midst of grief, teaching people to embrace the joy even during times of intense grief. I was really attracted to Dana and her account over on Instagram because in her own words, she says the Forced Joy Project is a community of people who are willing to share in life's brightest and darkest moments. And I think that is just so inspiring, isn't it, Dana? Because we all know how horrendous and horrifically painful grief is. It's very hard to put that into words. It's almost something that really can only be felt by the person going through it. It's so different for everyone. But, I really, for me and what I do, and how I help people is definitely try and lean into that joy a little bit and find that joy in life again. And you just do it so beautifully. And reading your story and where the idea came from, I think it originated, didn't it, between you and Brad?
It did,
yeah. In terms of how you coped with what you were kind of trying to deal with at the time. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that, Dana, where it kind of started and a little bit about Brad and what happened to him?
Yeah. So as you said, and first of all, thank you for that beautiful introduction. You did such a great job. I was like, oh, that's makes it sound so great.
It is that
great. So as you mentioned, the Forced Joy Project was something that Brad and I started. Brad was my husband. We had been together we were married for 8 years, had been together for about 13 when he got sick. I'm trying to be like, how far back do I need to go to capture this? And he was diagnosed with cancer in the fall of 2016. And it was kidney cancer. It was stage 4. So it was terminal from the start. And I mean, it, as I'm sure anyone that's been through it or anyone who has not can imagine, just rocked our world in the worst possible way. It was something we'd already been through cancer with myself. We just never expected it. And Brad was always very open with talking about all of the stuff, like the hard stuff. I was a lot more closed off, and I, give Brad so much credit for all of this that exists today, because his influence just affected me to see how open he was about not just what's good, but what's difficult in life. And so when he was diagnosed, we talked about all of it very openly, and it was really difficult, really hard. And during one particularly hard day, I was desperate. Like I felt like truly desperation for we cannot continue every day in this way. And I was like, we need to find a way to find little moments of joy, just to find something. And Brad was much more of the realist. I was, this grew up, you have to be positive. And Brad was much better at acknowledging things that weren't. So he kind of rolled his eyes at me and was like, you want us to force joy? And I was like, I do. That's what I need. And so he, kind of was like, all right, this is what we're going to do. So we just started documenting it. That's how it started. It was just not every day. There was no real schedule for it, but we started documenting just these little tiny things during his diagnosis in and out of the hospitals that brought us joy, that made us laugh. And that's kind of how it started.
When you were doing that, was it? I mean, it's forced because you have to look for it, don't you? And you have to be able to see what you can create joy out of. And I think it's very easy to very much focus on, what you're going to lose, the loss, the grief, the heartache, because it's so big, isn't it? And it just takes over every single corner of your being, of your universe. So, I always really like to encourage people to kind of look for the good, acknowledge what is good and can be seen as good, because I think it helps us. So when you were looking for those moments of joy, when you found them, did it bring you actual moments of joy?
It did, and I think there's different moments. So I think with Brad, it did. I mean, for sure. Like, we would laugh about the most ridiculous things that we might not have paid attention to. And that was real joy. We maybe had to force ourselves to look for it, but that doesn't mean the joy wasn't real. And I think there were moments after Brad died where I was like, trying to keep this mentality and just, I couldn't, like, it was too hard. And so I think it's recognizing that, like, it is important to look for it. It is important to acknowledge this, but it's not always going to be real. It's not this magic thing that suddenly you're going to snap out. Like, the grief is still there. Yeah. Forcing the joy, finding the joy doesn't mean you're eliminating the grief. Like, I think anyone that's listening to this has been through an experience that they know that grief is still part of the experience.
Yeah. And it's not an either or thing, is it? You don't have to have one to kind of right. rule out the other. It's learning to kind of gradually make space, I guess, for both, isn't it? But exactly, allowing yourself to do that, because it can feel wrong, can't it, in some moments, and impossible too sometimes. Sometimes you really are in a place where it's so dark you don't want to see it, you can't see it, and that's okay too. It's learning how to find, I guess, your way, isn't it, in that. So do you think, did Brad initially was a bit like, what? did it help him through his journey, do you think?
I think it helped him, but I don't know if I don't think he needed it as much as I did, if that makes sense. I think he was just naturally better in touch with the full spectrum of what he was going through and his emotions. And he could better let in the joy than maybe I could. I think I needed that for myself. But, I think documenting those moments, for me, it's obviously for me now, like, I have these moments, I have these videos of us singing in the car on the way to, oncology appointments and dancing along the river. Like, I have these moments documented. And so I don't know if some part of me was like, I'm going to need these. I certainly was not a conscious thought, but looking back, I'm like, why did I need this? Why? And, so I'm not sure Brad needed it. I know he gained something from it, but it certainly was more for me.
And then, Brad sadly died, didn't he? It was 100 days after his diagnosis. So very quick for you.
Very fast. Yeah.
Did you know that you were going to continue, forcing the joy, or was that something that kind of naturally evolved after he died?
Yeah, I mean, in that time, even like when Brad was diagnosed and we were forcing joy, it was not thought out of anything beyond that moment and what it was for. So no, I did not think at that point that the Instagram account existed. Brad and I did that when he was still alive, and it just kind of became my personal account where I started documenting what I was going through. And it was not a lot of joy after Brad died. I mean, it was no longer about, let me highlight the joy. It truly was the place that I went and let it all out, like had a place for my feelings to go. So it took some time to kind of get back to what the Forced Joy Project was about and to start talking about joy along with the grief. And it slowly just kind of evolved from there, but it certainly wasn't something immediately after Brad died that I thought would become what it is today. There was no intentional thought in that.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how our journeys evolve over time. Yeah, and things that we don't maybe think are possible or that we're capable of. But it's like in those early days, you can't see any joy, any light, any hope, and you think, how am I ever going to get through this? Is this permanent? You can't imagine feeling any real joy in life again. So how long do you think it was after Brad died that you felt a really natural moment of joy? Do you remember a moment where you kind of thought, actually I can feel it?
Yeah, It's interesting because I was thinking about this the other day where in my mind it was probably months, and I ended up leaving and driving around cross country a couple months after Brad died. I just felt like I had to get out of my space. Like I was so buried in my grief that felt like the only thing I could do was to just leave. And Brad and I had talked about doing that. So it was kind of already in my mind of like this road trip, this cross country trip. And it was certainly there that like now I can remember like just being out in the world, out in nature, experiencing these things, a sunrise and, over a mountain, and these things that are just so magically beautiful, and feeling something. Mm-hmm. But I also remember, so the day Brad died, I'm sitting on I had a little rooftop deck, and I'm sitting there with who are not like the closest people to me. And it was Brad's best friend, his siblings, and my sister. And we're sitting there and we just start like laughing. And I can't remember what it was about, but we had this moment where it's like of like dark humor, laughing. And, that's the day he died. And so I think it's like, and then of course felt horrible and guilty, but it's like, that's something now where it's like, if you find joy, if you're feeling this, like I felt so terrible feeling any kind of joy early on, or it's just like, God, it's okay. Like, yeah, that guilt is so heavy and it's so real. And I don't know where that comes from, but I'm sure we've both talked to so many people where I don't know anyone that doesn't experience that.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a companion to grief, isn't it? Guilt. Mm-hmm. It lives in many different forms and in many different ways, and it can hold us back. And it's often through the kind of stories we tell ourselves, isn't it, of what mm-hmm. it means if we do certain things or behave in a certain way. But actually, I think we learn as we move through our grief that things don't mean what we think they mean. Finding moments of joy doesn't mean that you're no longer grieving. The two kind of sit side by side, and it's making space for both, isn't it? And I think it's important that we do, because we have to grieve, we have to feel the grief, but we have to allow ourselves some respite from that as well, and kind of integrating our new normal. But what did you do in those moments that were really heavy for you, those deep grief moments? How did you, because you said Brad was very good at kind of expressing himself mm-hmm. and communicating, and it's something you've had to learn from him. What did you do? How did you manage? I know you said you kind of left and you went off. Was that one of your ways of coping?
That was I spent thousands of miles crying in my car. Like I feel like my car, I would listen to music it was the whole experience of a certain playlist of all of our favorite songs, and driving and having the space to do that. I feel like when being at home, it felt like everyone's kind of looking to you for when you're okay. Everyone wants you to be okay. They check in, and it's like tiptoeing around you. And I feel like for me, leaving and doing this by myself gave me that space to truly grieve in the way that I needed to grieve. And I'm not saying I couldn't have done that. I think, I spent a lot of time crying in my bed before that. But that was really helpful for me, was kind of leaning into it, putting on the sad music, and letting myself feel in a way that I kind of spent my whole life not allowing myself feel these things. And I think that was part of it, like being okay that, this is the worst thing you can go through. Like, why are we trying to pretend to be fine with it? Like, we're not okay with this. We're not fine. So I think acknowledging that.
Yeah. And I think that's really sort of powerful, isn't it, Dana? Because I believe that we have to create space for our grief. We've got to make time for it. And I think we have to, I believe that we kind of build a relationship with it, kind of get to know it, what it looks like, feels like, how we live with it, how we kind of nurture ourselves through it, I suppose. And I guess what you did there was you created that safe space for you to grieve in. And I speak to so many people that try to continue in life the way they were, living up to the expectations others place on them, that they place on themselves. They've still got to turn up to work and be amazing at work. They've still got to run the house and keep in touch with family and be an amazing mum and dad to their children. It's like, where do you find space for that grief? So I can completely kind of understand why you thought, you know what, I'm just going to get my man and go. Like, that must have felt very liberating and empowering to do that, but scary.
I mean, looking back now, 100%, at the time it felt insane. And I think everyone else was like, what are you doing? No one fully understood. I don't know if I fully understood. And I also recognize that I had the privilege to be able to do that. I didn't have kids to take care of. I was able to not work for a period of time and do that. And, so I think a lot of people are listening to this and be like, well, that would have been nice to do. And it's, I think it really is though, just trying to find where is that space you can take for yourself. And for some people, I think they need their community and people. And that was not what I needed in my grief. Like, I felt like I couldn't fully go there with other people. Like, I needed that space just for me to kind of figure it out and what was next.
Did that change though, as you went through? You kind of said you didn't need community in grief. Was that just in that moment, or has that been a continual feeling throughout your grieving journey that you've wanted to do it within and not with others?
That has shifted a lot. I mean, I have a whole community now online of people that I just love being a part of. Eventually, and even during that time, it's not that I was completely alone. Again, the same people that were on that rooftop with me, those were, I talked to them, I texted with them throughout this whole process. They were kind of the people. I kind of shut out the rest of the world, but I did have this small group of people that I felt like were grieving in a way that was similar to my level. And it's like, that was the only people I wanted to talk to, were other people that were in that kind of pain. And yeah, eventually that shifts. We are people, we are community oriented people, even though that was my initial grief experience. And I'm an introvert that is very internal. Community is important, especially as a young widow where we were so isolated and alone. Being able to find other people that had that kind of experience, and certainly now talking with people, has been such a huge help for me in this process.
Yeah, it's very healing, isn't it? I think being with others when you're ready for that. And again, I think it's the same with everything in grief and in life. Like, it's finding a balance, isn't it, of all of it. And I think we do need communities and people around us, but sometimes we just need solitude as well. Right. We need to find that space so that we can think about us, because there's so much lost, isn't there, when we lose a partner. And you kind of touched on there, Donna, that you didn't have children with Brad. How do you think that has impacted your journey? But I speak to a lot of people, some do have children and some don't, and some will kind of look at the opposite of what they've got and think that that's better or worse or indifferent or whatever. And I think sometimes people that don't have children almost feel like they're a little bit left behind in it. How did that part of the story for you impact your journey and how you dealt with it all?
First of all, I think being a woman in your 30s without kids, you're already kind of on the outside, and then becoming a young widow on top of that, it feels like it's just an additional layer of not really belonging. So many of my peers in life, and then in this widow world that we're now a part of, kids is a part of that. And it does feel like you don't fully belong in this group when it's talking about being a solo parent. And there's parts of me that it's like, I'm truly like, I'm thankful that we didn't have kids, and that I get to be totally selfish. I moved out of my place. I, live up north on a lake now. I got to make all of these decisions for me, and solo parents don't always have that available to them, but it's also so lonely. It's so quiet and so lonely, especially in that early, now I'm 5 years out. And so I've crafted this life that I just truly love. But initially it's like, there felt like no reason to get out of bed, that there was no purpose. There was no one that needed me. And that was hard too. I feel like when you're in a marriage, it's, Brad and I used to always say we don't need each other, we choose each other, but there is a level of dependency on the person you share your life with. And so for your whole family to be gone and to not have anything left to care for is really hard. It's so isolating in an already isolating period.
Yeah, I can understand that, absolutely. I think having a reason to get up, a purposeful day, is what keeps a lot of people going, isn't it? Did you and Brad talk about having children? Was it something you consciously decided not to? Were you like waiting to do it a bit later?
So we talked about it. I was always kind of on the fence. It was something I was not a woman who was like, my clock is ticking, and like, let's go. But I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 28. Brad and I had been married at that point for a couple of years, and we were just enjoying our time. We kind of talked about it, but when I was diagnosed, I relapsed shortly after my first clean scan. And so I was told that I should wait 5 years before having the kids conversation. And so Brad and I, we didn't talk about it. And Brad got diagnosed a couple weeks after my 5 years. And so it was like that period of our life where we could have talked about it. And I'm not sure, Brad wanted kids more than I did. He was more on that side of the fence. I think we were both kind of towing the line, but on different sides. And it was just something we never got the chance to fully discuss. And that's its own level of grief and loss. And I can sit here and say, I'm grateful I was not a person that knew 100% I wanted to have kids. And it's something I've been able to let go of because of that. But there's so many what ifs and questions. And there was a period of time when, in between Brad being sick and him dying, where my body was just out of whack. And I was like, maybe I'm pregnant, and how much Brad would love that. And, there's so many emotions that come with having a kid, and how much I wish I had a version of Brad still. And so there's all these things I've had to kind of come to terms with. And ultimately it's where I'm supposed to be now, and happy that I will be an aunt to, I am an aunt to 8 nieces and nephews, and get to be a part of their lives and help raise them in certain ways. And, I've accepted it, which feels nice, and I feel fortunate in that, because I know that is not most people's experience.
I think you have a really beautiful way of acknowledging everything that is and isn't. And it comes back to that duality of grief, doesn't it? Kind of, I think we really do have to look at what we've lost, what no longer is, what no longer can be, because there's so much, and it's not just about losing our person. There's so many other losses attached to that. And we can get caught up in that, can't we? That can definitely be like our focal point. But you are very, I think, natural at kind of looking at the situation you find yourself in, and looking for what you have got, what is, and accepting, or trying to accept that in the best way that you can, and look for the positives in that. Is that something you've had to learn to do through your grieving journey, or do you think it's something that was naturally within you?
I think I have, to a fault, always been a positive, people-pleasing type of person. Grief balance of, where do I actually feel grateful and I can accept something that isn't possible, and find a way to find, to be okay with that, versus that kind of toxic positivity of everything works out for a reason and I have to be grateful for everything, because there's a lot of things I didn't feel grateful for and I felt very angry for, and it takes time to get there. But I think grief gives you the space, and maybe not for everyone, but for me at least, it gave me the space to distinguish the difference in those of what I actually was feeling, and how I could come to terms with certain things that I couldn't change. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
No, it does. It does. Absolutely. Because it's, people don't like all the terms, but it's a process, it's a journey, it's a lifelong learning, isn't it? And it's learning how to grow around your grief, I suppose, so that you can come to a place of acceptance with it and learn how to carry it more lightly. What do you think you've discovered about life, yourself? I mean, what tools, strategies, those kind of things have you used that have really helped you in your journey? And what have you discovered about you and life that maybe you didn't see before?
Ooh, what a great question. I don't know if I gave myself, I think I was always kind of floundering, trying to find my purpose and my place in this world. And I think in this space of grief after Brad died, I started trusting myself and what I could offer. And I'm still, I still have so many insecurities, but I think grief gives you a level of not caring. And that led to getting to the point of like, I'm trusting my gut, my instinct on who I am. And that has opened up doors to truly being like, what is the space I want to be in this world? Including with the Forced Joy Project in terms of relationships and friendships. It gives you that space to be like, what do you really want in your life? And I think it's easy to still doubt that. And that's something that I personally was just like, I'm going full force in a direction that feels right. Even if it's a mistake, it's something that I need to trust myself that this is what my gut is saying. And it's taken me in a lot of different directions and I've learned a lot. And I appreciate that now I'm in a place where I can do that.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's the one thing that I see, my clients struggling with the most is figuring out what it is they want next. Like, who am I? Where do I fit in this world? What do I want out of it? What am I trying to create? And they're big questions, aren't they? They're really big questions. And people get so frustrated in that, I don't know, where am I heading? What next step should I take? What do I want? How did you go about discovering those things, the answers to those questions for yourself?
It took time. I think there's so much pressure because, when I feel like when I first became a widow, there wasn't this amazing grief community, this virtual grief community that exists. And maybe it was, and I just wasn't finding it. But now, because there's this community, we see so much of what people are doing. And so I'm 5 years out and I've had people be like, oh, it looks like you have it all figured out. And I think there's so much pressure now that you have to turn your tragedy into something, into purpose, and so I think, and I did, but I don't think you have to. And for me, it was not, like I said earlier, it was not this intentional thing. There were several years of me floundering and figuring it out and moving just because it felt like I needed to do that, not with any idea of this was going to help me find my purpose, but just because it felt right. And so, I just like to remind people that we see different stages of people's grief journey. It's all out there. And it's very easy to feel worse about yourself if you're still like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what my purpose is, because that took years. And I feel like I'm still trying to figure it out every day. I'm like, what does this look like? Is this the right thing? Where does this go? And I don't know if those questions ever fully go away for anyone. Hopefully, hopefully we're always trying to grow, but it took a long time. And I don't know if there was anything besides just surviving for me. And, if an inch opened up into something that felt right, I went in that direction. And so I think it's follow the little things that feel right in those moments and be curious and explore and see where it takes you, knowing you can always go back the other way.
Did you have moments where you were just absolutely like stuck, for want of a better word, where you thought, I don't even know what next step to take? Was that where you would force yourself almost to take a step, to find the joy, to do something that maybe was a bit different?
Yes. I think I had a lot of those moments. For sure, for the first 18 months, I think I felt like that regularly of, I have no idea where I belong, what I want to do, who I am. And then for me, the first big step that I took was I left my loft that Brad and I lived in, and I moved to a city where I knew no one and left kind of everything behind. And that's a major move. And I don't, I feel like I'm a person that I'm like, go big or go home, and I'm going to do this. And it doesn't always have to be that big, but for 18 months, I just felt completely lost. And it wasn't until I took that step, I could start to like kind of create whatever this next life was going to be for me.
Yeah, that was very brave, wasn't it? Kind of.
It felt kind of stupid. I mean, yes, now I'm like, it's worked out, but it felt crazy, but in a way that I needed to just jolt myself out of this life that I did feel stuck in, where everything felt the same, but without Brad in it. So then everything was actually drastically different.
Yes. Yeah, I hear that, and I think some people are very scared to make any kind of changes like that to their lives, because it's that feeling of leaving someone behind, of maybe being disloyal, losing the things that connect you to your person. But
the life that you built.
Yeah, completely. But then it can feel incredibly freeing sometimes, I think, to make some changes, and they don't have to be huge like that, like it can be just painting a room or buying a new bed. I don't know, but just they don't have to be grand. They can sometimes be smaller. But I think for me, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but it helped me realize that yes, life is going to keep changing, things are going to keep changing, but actually your person is still with you. They're in here, that you are who you are because of them. And yeah, things do change, but it doesn't change your love for them.
I think it took me a while to truly feel that, but you're so right. That it's not about the things, it's not about the place you lived. I think we hold on to those things to hold on to our people. And the last thing Brad would have wanted was for me to stay anywhere, do anything that didn't feel right anymore.
Did you talk to Brad? I mean, did he say to you what he wanted for you when he was gone? Did you have those conversations, or were they too difficult?
We had some conversations. We didn't have a lot about it because, again, it felt like Brad forced those conversations in such a good way. We had a podcast, and so we recorded all of these. And so this was part of it for that, where he was like, I want people to know what this experience is like. I was in denial. I think like that's how I survived, was I was like, Brad is not going to die. But we did have a couple conversations, and it wasn't specific. It wasn't anything like, feel free to do this, or you can date again, or you can, get rid of everything. But because I already knew that about Brad. Like I already knew that, like, I did not hold on to that guilt of, would Brad be okay with this? I'm curious of what Brad would think about my life, and I wonder about this a lot, but I didn't have that kind of burden on top of my grief of Brad would want me to stay here, feel like I owed it to him. So
yeah, and I think that's so helpful to us, isn't it, in our journey, whether we know that as a fact because our person has said it or not. I always kind of say to people, choose the good story, and if that's the story that helps you find your way forward, then choose that if you haven't been able to. Because, we make up so many stories in our mind, don't we? And we always tend to go to the bad one, the one that makes us feel terrible. And I think, do you know what? Don't do that. Choose the good one. Because it it gives us that freedom, I suppose, that knowing that that's okay, and gives us permission, I think, doesn't it, to create something good for ourselves. So, 5 years on, Dana, what does your grief look like for you now?
It is less outwardly visible. It is still there. Now it's more of big kind of triggering moments that where, you know, I'll have kind of a grief meltdown, but it's versus early on where it's every moment of every day. You know, now it's more of something will happen. I'll hear a song, I'll, you know, hear someone's story that will remind me of it and have these bigger moments, but I also can carry it in a way where those kind of caught off guard moments are a lot less, because I know how to think about Brad in my life in a way that, like, with just so much love. And I never thought I'd get to that space. I remember people like, oh, one day you'll smile about it and you won't always cry. And I hated it. I hated when people would say that to me, because I was like, that will never happen. And, you know, people are right. Like, time doesn't make the pain go away. Like, I miss Brad every day. I'm devastated by this loss every day, but life does continue and the grief is there, but so is the joy. And I think as time goes on, it's easier to bring in these other really beautiful things that take up space in a great way in your life.
Definitely, absolutely. And I mean, would you say you're a very different person now to the person that you were before? Do you kind of miss that person as well?
You know, that's such an interesting question. I feel like I think about this a lot of, you know, who that person was. I think at the core, I'm very similar. I think I have owned my space here differently in a way that Brad would be so proud of. Like, it was something I think Brad always saw this potential in me to, like, find my purpose and do something and have a positive impact in the world. And I never really knew what that was. And so it's very interesting to like think about that in like such a beautiful way of, like, I have grown as a person and be very proud of who I am. And then also, like, I just wish Brad could see me. You know, I'm sad that Brad didn't get to see this version of myself that, you know, he kind of always knew I would become.
Yes, didn't see that sort of come to fruition almost. Yeah, I know. And I think a lot of people feel guilt around kind of growing, I suppose, through their grief. You know, I speak to a few of my clients who say, I feel bad that I'm going to invest in myself and maybe become a better version of me and kind of discover parts of me that they knew existed but I didn't believe in and didn't maybe show to the world. And that's another layer of guilt, right? You know, that we have to battle through, isn't it? And again, it's giving ourselves permission to go, it's okay, I'm allowed. It doesn't mean anything negative.
Yeah, you know, for me, I think, you know, that guilt and that piece comes in really heavily because I'm in another relationship now and with someone that I love very much. And I feel like he gets the better version of me, you know, and that is like such a like crazy thing to think about and to feel guilty about of it, that's growth with living life. Hopefully we're all continuing to grow and that was going to happen regardless. Like, I would love to believe I would have become this person with Brad, and I think I would have, but another person gets to experience almost like I don't want to say better, but it feels like a more authentic, real, like, you know, confident version of myself.
I really hear you on that, because I feel like since Simon died, for me, I've been on such a journey that it has revealed I'm so much more confident now than I used to be. I'm far more fulfilled and aligned than I ever used to be. And, you know, it's almost, I sometimes think, what would Simon think, you know, if he was to come back and see me now? Like, would he kind of recognize this version of me? What would he take out of that? Because it kind of shifts us, doesn't it? And it shapes who we become. And, you know, I truly believe we have a choice in how we kind of respond to our losses. Do you think that? Do you think that there was a conscious or a subconscious choice that you made in your journey? Or do you think it's something else?
You know, I think every day is a choice, how we choose to live. So I believe there's a choice in how we handle our situations. I also recognize that it's easier for certain people, and people that struggle with depression and things like that, it's a much harder choice to make, and it doesn't feel like a choice. So aside from that, I think we choose how we take a step forward every day. And some days we choose to take a step back, and that's okay. And for me, it's like, I overall hope I'm taking more steps forward than steps back. And I think, again, it goes back to just like giving yourself grace, being understanding of, it doesn't always have to be this forward momentum, but you have a choice, and that leads to where you go in life, what direction you're going in.
I agree. You're right. There are some certain factors, aren't they, that kind of change the choices that we feel are available to us in different situations, for sure. But I think a lot of the time people don't believe they have a choice in it. I hear so often, and I'm sure you do too, people grieving, widows, widowers, surviving partners, kind of a common response to anything is, well, what choice do I have? I've always liked to kind of remind people that there is always another choice. But you're not
making. Might be hard.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
It's not easy.
Yeah, it's not, is it? It's not always easy. It is hard work. And do you think you've had to work really hard through your grief to get to where you are now? It's not just something that's happened. You've worked at it. I've worked very hard, because it is, every day it's you have to, it's your choice how you live your life. And for me, I want a big, bold, fulfilling life. And part of that is because Brad died, and he doesn't get to do that. And there are moments where I'm like, no, I don't want to move forward without him. I don't want to take that step without him. And I certainly felt that early on, of the, like, I want to be in this space because this is the space I had with Brad. And eventually that shifted where, you have to take that step. And it was so hard to do, but it requires a lot of work to create the life that you want through grief. In grief. I don't know that anyone that feels easy for. No, not at all. Absolutely, it's not. It's
far from, and that feels unfair. And I get stuck in that. Where I'm just like, why do I have to do this? This feels so unfair. Everyone else gets to just live their life. And
we definitely fall into that. Why me?
Oh my gosh,
it's really tough. You mentioned there you're in another relationship now. How was the world of dating for you? How did you find that as a widow?
It was horrible. Dating as a widow, I started dating. So another thing I went through is I was taking care of my dad. After Brad died, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And so I moved him into my house. And this was about 2 years after Brad died. And I was just in a really hard space. And so dating became a distraction, which I would not recommend getting on the apps for the first time as a grieving widow while your dad is dying. But that was it for me. And I hated it. I felt like I didn't have time for all of this like roundabout conversation. I got very drunk the first date I went on. I was so uncomfortable and so awkward. And eventually there's a lot of in between that I'm happy to talk about, but I ended up dating somebody that I had known already, that I'd been sort of friends with and acquaintances with for, almost 10 years. And that's who my current partner is. And, we've been dating for over a year now, and we do the long distance thing, but he's been such a wonderful support of, grieving and dating a widow and what, everything that comes with that.
That's so lovely. Did he know Brad then?
So he and Brad went to high school together.
Wow.
And Brad was a little bit older, so they weren't friends in high school. And I didn't become friends with him. My sister's now ex-husband also went to high school. And so that's how my sister met him. And so my brother-in-law was better friends with my current partner. And so when they got married, we kind of like would just run into each other and hang out. But so he and Brad knew each other, but they weren't super close. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you quite like that? Is that quite nice that he knew him?
I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's nice because when I talk about Brad, it's not, he's not imagining this version. He actually knew enough about Brad, and he knew Brad and I together. I think that probably makes it more complicated for him, because he saw us as a couple. He saw our relationship. He saw how in love we were. And so, I think that's harder probably for him than it is for me, where I'm like, oh, this is so nice.
Yes.
That's a certain reality that he has to carry.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that, that's a really good point, isn't it? Like, it's hard for us, I think, as widows and widowers to go out into the dating world. But I think it's really hard to date a widow or a widower as well. There's so much pressure felt by the other person to kind of step into somebody's shoes, be that great person, because we, when somebody dies, we tend to talk about how amazing they were and how brilliant. And and for me, with my new partner, I very much tried to keep Simon real. Like, he wasn't perfect. He could be an absolute pain in the backside. And just kind of go, it wasn't the perfect life that you're going to imagine it was, because he died, and you're probably going to hear more about the good stuff than the bad stuff. But I think it's really difficult. I think it's very, very fragile starting a new relationship for both parties, and I think it takes a lot of honesty and communication and a lot of trust, really, on both parts, doesn't it? But it's certainly not an answer or a fix to anything, which I think we can, a bit like I kind of threw myself into dating sites, about, I don't know, 8 months, I think, after Simon died. And it's that kind of searching for company, so know that, or an escape from your reality, a bit of like, I just want to feel like a normal person. Doesn't always work out in for you with your dad as well. That's a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot. It certainly was.
And
I think you're right about, we use it to avoid a lot of what we're feeling, especially early on, where it's like, I just want companionship. I just don't want to feel so lonely. And I'm now in a relationship that I love and see a future with, but it took me several years of kind of going through other dating and relationships to be ready for what that meant. And I think it was almost harder in the beginning because I saw this potential with Nate, my current partner, because it's like, oh my God, like now I'm asking to like actually share a life. And up to this point, Brad was the only person that got like that version. And so that's like a whole different level of grief of the dating people that were wrong felt easier in a lot of ways, because it was just to fill a void versus imagining a different life with another person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge, isn't it? It's huge. It's a minefield.
You think you're ready, and then you're like, oh wait,
what am I doing?
Yeah.
Then you start behaving like some kind of crazy person.
Oh yeah.
And everyone else is thinking, what is she doing?
Yeah.
I know, it's certainly, it could not bring out the bestness as much as it can bring out the bestness. Again, like the two sides of the coin, isn't it? Absolutely.
Right.
So what would you, now knowing what you know, looking back on your journey, your story, your experiences, what would you go back and say to Donna in those first few days, weeks? What would be, your advice, your words of wisdom, your golden nuggets?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't think that version would have listened to anything I said. I think just give yourself grace, like be patient, like don't feel this pressure to figure it out, because I think that's where we go, is how do I figure out what this life looks like without Brad? And that felt so overwhelming on top of just grief. And so I think just be patient and trust that one day, like something will feel right, or at least right enough to move towards.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, isn't it? Having that trust in the process and in yourself. I think you kind of very beautifully said a couple of times that trust your instincts, and what I love to kind of say to people is like, the way, you have all the answers within you, it's just may not happen at the pace that you want it to happen at, because when we're in pain and we're hurting so much, it's like, I just want to get out. How do I get away from this? How do I fix it? Why do I fill these voids that I have, these gaping holes in my life? And we're frantically searching for answers and on the internet, and then we look at other people's kind of Instagram reels and all that kind of stuff, and oh my god, they got it all figured out. How did they do that? It's like, don't believe everything you see on social media.
Right, which we know, and somehow we put all of this weight into another widow that's doing it, and we're like, see, her life is working out perfectly, and we're like, this is social media. Like, this is not the full story.
No, absolutely. You're seeing a tiny snippet. Nobody's perfect, nobody's got it all figured out. We're all carrying our stuff around and just trying a bit better today than we did yesterday. And I think exactly, that's sometimes the best we can hope for, isn't it? So what in what way now? I know you've got your Instagram that you do so brilliantly, which I know helps so many, and you come up in my groups a lot. People really are inspired by you. You're brilliant. You have such a great energy and a great outlook, which is fantastic. But I know you have other ways of helping people as well. So how else do you help people through their grief?
So other than just sharing my story on Instagram and encouraging other people to share theirs, I do interview people about their stories that want to have a place to open up, because I feel like for me, that was so therapeutic, was being able to have an outlet to kind of pour my emotions. And so that's been helpful, I think, for other people to see different versions of grief and different types of loss besides just being a widow. And the other thing that, I do that I love is I create what I call Book of Stories. And this came from purely selfish reasons. After Brad died, I wanted stories of Brad. Like, I was just like, I want everyone to send me their stories. We talk about it at like the memorial service, everyone gives a toast and they shared all of this. I couldn't tell you a single thing anyone said, like a single story, because you're not there. You're not mentally there. I feel like I was not sober in any way. So it's like, these were things that they're lost and they're so beautiful. And so I started asking for people to give me their stories, and I created a book out of what people sent. And eventually was like, this is the grief gift I wanted. And so I figured out a way, like, how do you create this for other people? And so this is the thing that I'm just so proud of, because I think stories are, it's what we have, and it keeps our people alive in a lot of ways, and hearing stories of different parts of their life. And so it's the thing I'm the most proud of that has come out of this horrible situation. And I think Brad would really be proud of, because he was such a person that valued stories and storytelling, and, the memories of like what makes someone's life, it's like you get a glimpse into these people's lives, and not just the like pedestal version that, as you said, that we kind of talk about them, but the really funny, raw, like moments of someone are in these stories from people that knew them when they were little or went to high school with them. And so it's a really fun project to work on.
I love that idea. I love it so much, because like I've kind of, I'm sort of over 5.5 years into my journey now, and I know some stories are fading, and some people will say, do you remember this when Simon did this? And I'm like, no, I don't remember that. Right. And then you're like, oh my God, I don't want to forget. Right. And of course you never forget the person, but it's true. The time, more time that passes, you know, as much as we don't want it to, that the memories do fade. And sometimes when you have done something with your person, like before Simon and I got married and had children, we went traveling. And only he and I shared that experience, you know. So when we talked about it, you know, when you've got someone to fill in the gaps, you've got each other to go, do you remember this? Do you remember that? And actually, when you are the sole bearer, carrier, you know, rememberer of these events, these stories, these experiences, that's like, oh, I can't. And to be able to piece those things together, to ask others as well, to share their stories, and to be able to write them down as you remember them and have them in a lovely keepsake, I think is just such a beautiful idea. Such a beautiful idea, almost quite like therapeutic journaling. I love that. So how do people get this then?
So it's on my website, forcejoyproject.com. There's a link for Book of Stories. And so you can get all the information. And I'm currently looking into international shipping because everyone's asking. And I know probably a lot of your audience is not in the US or Canada. So hopefully by the time this goes up, it'll be available internationally.
Oh, that's a fantastic idea. Yeah, really good. And we can put the link in the show notes as well, so that people can find that there. Thank you so much. That has been such a wonderful conversation, and you have so much wisdom, I think, and such a wonderful way of looking at life.
Thank you.
It's really inspiring and really uplifting, because it's hard, you know, and it's not taking all of that pain and heartache away from you. It's not easy to find the joy and to create those moments, and to kind of force yourself to go out looking for it sometimes. But you know, what you do just proves that it can be done, that it's still there, and that you can feel happy in life again, and life can feel good again in a different way. But you know, as I always say, different doesn't always mean bad. It's just different, isn't it? It's very different.
It's very true. It's very true.
So thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing everything you have, and hopefully look forward to seeing more stories on Instagram.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.